You're watching a replay of Brain Drain with Rich Cabaceres. For more videos just like this, hit that red subscribe button.
And good morning. You're listening to Brain Drain on the legendary 1480 WSAR. And that's right, we are talking about my generation, your generation, everybody's generation. Because we're talking about the generation gap between Generation X, baby boomers, millennials, and traditionalists, and why everybody views things in a different way, right? So if we take a look at what's happened recently, we can take a look and see that now millennials have overtaken the baby boomer population as the largest generation in the entire country. So why is it that millennials keep on being put down because of a lack of an understanding? So today we're going to try to bridge the gap between baby boomers and millennials, who are the two largest generations who are living today. And the only way that we can do that is by having a conversation, taking your perspective, and seeing what you think. Tell me what you think millennials are like. What do you think baby boomers are like? If you are a baby boomer, tell me what you think. If you're a millennial, tell me what you think about the other generations. And of course, Generation X. Generation X, the lack of optimism, the approach towards work as a means to an end, as opposed to being optimistic and thinking that you have the opportunity to speak freely and all this stuff. Tell me why you feel the way that you do about the other generations. Because I think one of the big issues that we have here in our society is we have this gap where we don't understand other adults that we live and work in the world with. And that causes some huge concerns. And one place that is concerning is in the governmental process. And if you take a look at the way people go and try to get elected, what do? They go around your town, they go around your city, they go around your state, and they knock on doors of people who have already voted. And those folks tend to be older, tend to be baby boomers. So the question becomes, why are they not appealing to the largest generation in the country, which is millennials? We talk about why less and less people vote. Maybe it's because Generation X feels disenfranchised. Maybe it's because the millennials feel like you don't care about them. So let's talk about the generation gap and what policies need to happen to change kind of the country as a whole for everybody. We're going to go. So to go into the conversation again, we're talking about the generation gap, the difference between baby boomers, millennials, Generation X. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you? Hello. Okay. So now I think it's important to talk about one of the things that the generation gap is completely separate on, and it's education, right? So education, when you're a traditionalist, and for definition purposes, a traditionalist is somebody who is born between 1900 and 1945. A baby boomer is somebody who's born between 1946 and 1964. Generation X is somebody who's born between 1965 and 1980. And millennials are born from 1981 to 2000. And there's this little group in between the Generation X and millennials, this tweener group called the Xennials, and they are from 76 to 85. So if you're in one of those groups, call in and tell me what you think. But the biggest gap is education. So, for instance, traditionalists think that education is a dream. Baby boomers think that education is a birthright. Generation X thinks it's a way to get there, a way to get to success. And millennials think it's an incredible expense. So, if you look at this and you look at the conversations that we're having about local education, national education, I think it brings kind of some things into light. What say you, Cole? You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Good morning, Rich.
How you doing?
I've taught most of the, probably not millennials. I think I taught the Generation X.
Okay.
And, now I'm looking for part-time work. Just just to keep busy, and I consider myself physically, mentally, and emotionally astute.
Okay.
The newest trick they have, I've been going online, so you leave all your information that they want, and then they call you. And this young whippersnapper from the millennials will call you back. When they call you, they don't ever ask your age, because that would be discriminatory.
Well, it's discriminatory technically. It's a protected class if you're over the age of 40.
Right, and then but they ask it in a different way. They want to know what year you graduated from high school. And when you tell them that, back in the 60s, they hang up. They don't even have the courtesy to say, oh, we're sorry, or ask any more questions. They could ask a lot more questions and know a lot more about you. Because you're in that age bracket doesn't mean that you died and you're just walking around the face of the earth. I'm totally disappointed that I consider myself perfectly capable of doing a job other than being a greeter at one of the local department stores.
So it's interesting that you say that, because the ruling class right now in business, age-wise, is the end of the baby boomer generation and the beginning of the Generation X generation. So when you talk about that and you say these young whippersnappers, it's actually not even millennials. It's these Generation Xers who have been shown to be skeptic and cynical, and it's these baby boomers who are now known to be optimistic. But you're ending up with this tweener age between baby boomer and Generation X where they may be cynical, they may be optimistic. So maybe that's why you're being treated the way you are, is rather than giving you the common courtesy, they're just hanging up on you because they're looking at you as a means to an end.
Yeah, and they really should, I think, to tell whether somebody is what they're looking for, because obviously, the next generation doesn't believe in going to work every day. Heaven forbid you should have to go to work 5 days a week. You got to be sick one day or have a doctor's appointment or something. I mean, they're having trouble keeping people because they don't have any work ethic.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, because actually one of the, when it refers to work ethic, one of the things about the baby boomer generation is they're workaholics. They want to work 60 hours a week. They're driven. And I think that's the generation you probably fall in. Am I correct about that, or you're a traditionalist? Were you born after 1945 or beforehand? And I know I'm asking you an age question, but I'm asking this in context. Okay.
Not much before, just before.
All right, so you were dedicated, and you pay your dues, and you work hard, and you respect authority. Now, Generation X wants balance. They want to work smarter and have a greater output, but they don't want to work longer hours. And Generation Y, which is the millennials, are into multitasking, ambitious. They're what's next, they're tenacity, and they're entrepreneurial. They want to work for themselves. So,
or they're exactly the opposite.
Or they don't want to work at all.
Work.
But, I'd say that every single generation has a group of people who doesn't want to work. And one of the arguments that I continue to make is that they want to work. The issue is the system doesn't allow them to work. And then there's this interesting perspective once you get into the Generation X and the millennial generation, where they were told you can be whatever you want to be. And when you do that to people, it actually ingrains in them that they don't have to do what they don't want to do. So maybe that's what
Right.
you're dealing with.
And everybody wants to be an entrepreneur, and they want to be their own boss. And, they can do it now on the computer, and work from home. You can do all those things, and I was just totally baffled when certain types of work. I mean, I'm looking for bookkeeping or receptionist type work, and I'm only looking for part-time. I don't need any benefits, all this kind of stuff. But nobody gets to ask you that far in the question.
You don't get that far into it. Well, thank you so much for sharing the process of you trying to find some part-time work. I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too.
You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Rich. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am well. So I was born in '87, and I was actually raised mostly by my grandparents. So I think I'm a little more conservative, or maybe that's not the right word, but a little more traditional than some younger millennials.
Yep.
But one of the things that to kind of pick up on the last caller is how people say that there's this idea that millennials don't have the right kind of work ethic, or they're just not interested in working. And I would respond to that by saying, you're right, because I'm not interested in working a part-time job for minimum wage that doesn't buy you diddly squat.
Right.
Back when baby boomers were growing up, you could, I think the cost of college textbooks were like, textbook was $20. You went to college with a summer's worth of work. Life isn't like that anymore. You spend about $30,000, $40,000 for a bachelor's degree, and above that for a master's degree, and even above that for a doctorate. And in terms of wages not moving, millennials don't want to work flipping burgers in some place, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't want that as a job either.
Now, before you go to your next point, I want to point out something that you said that I think is very, very fascinating. And you said you were born in 1987, which makes you a millennial. And you said that education is more costly than it's ever been. And one thing that's common with the millennial generation, myself included, is I think that college is more expensive and the return on investment is getting worse and worse and worse.
I absolutely agree with you. I have a bachelor's degree, and I feel that I don't feel that my degree was not helpful. It's very useful. It gets my foot in the door really anywhere I'd like to go. But with that said, the return on investment is definitely worse than I can in fact tell you my grandmother went to the same college that I did in the early 1980s or the late 1970s, and it was an agricultural school. Then it became a business school, and I went there. And she got an associate's degree there, and she made more money with her associate's degree than I have yet to make with my bachelor's degree, and at probably a third of the cost.
Right. And part of that is the availability of jobs, because the population continues to increase and the jobs are increasing at the same rate.
Absolutely. The other thing, too, is millennials have to compete with things that baby boomers did not. There's things like automation. The job market is just less available. At the time, I believe there were less women working in the workforce for baby boomers when they were all going into the workforce. So it's totally different dynamics now, and it's just frustrating when I hear they don't want to work. It's not that they don't want to work; it's that the opportunity isn't there. And if the opportunity is there, it's for poor wages. Well, it's nuts that we have an economy that celebrates when we added, we added 200,000 jobs this month, but 170,000 of those are part-time minimum wage service jobs. Those are not even real jobs. You can't live off those.
And, I think it's very interesting. I want to thank you for your call. Have a great day.
Thanks, Rich.
And I think it's very interesting because the first two callers, somebody was a traditionalist, which is the eldest generation who is living right now, and somebody else was a millennial who is among the youngest the youngest working generation as of right now. Obviously, we have Generation Z coming up, but they're barely working if they're working at all. I'm going to go to some of the Facebook Live comments. Somebody said it's a huge gap between Generation X and millennials. Millennials have no respect for their elders. And somebody else is saying that they're an exennial, or they're wondering what an exennial is. So we're going to go right back to the lines. The lines are hot. Thank you for holding on the line. You're on 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Morning, Rick. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Key phrase for the younger generation. Not all, but some.
Okay.
Instant gratification.
And it's funny that you say that, because instant gratification is something that happened kind of towards the end of Generation X and into Generation Y, or the millennial generation, which they're more commonly called.
They don't realize that when you take a position, a job, entry level, you have to work your way up. I was in law enforcement for 33 years. Mm-hmm. And with the younger individuals that came in, not all, the ones were in the military understood the chain of command.
Yep.
Those that weren't, I started my career in 1978. I did not go jump over the sergeant to speak to a lieutenant or a captain.
So they didn't understand chain of command.
Yes, and if there was an officer with seniority over you and you needed something, or he asked you to do something, you did it. You didn't question it.
Well, that's...
Before I retired, you had officers. I want to talk to the deputy. I want to talk to the captain.
And that's not necessarily true, because there's such a thing as a lawful order or an unlawful order. And actually...
Well, when I mean...
When I was in the military...
I don't mean an unlawful order.
Okay.
No.
And I want to give the benefit of the doubt to everybody by saying sometimes people expect you to do without questioning, even if it's something that's potentially illegal.
Well, you can always do it, but you can always say, I'm just going to put my objection in writing, or you don't do it.
Right, because...
No, I'm not talking about an unlawful order.
Okay.
Okay, I'm talking about something within the guidelines of responsibility of your job duties.
Clean the bathroom.
And, well, no, not even that.
Okay.
Well, a patrolman you're working with as a senior asks you to do something, and there's sometimes which you would get, I don't see anything in your collar.
Okay.
And then you can, the senior patrolman could say, okay, go talk to the sergeant.
But the opposite could be said, because you could also make the argument that somebody who is a younger person who works on the job feels that they're being treated by somebody who's older than them, who's their peer, as if they're authoritarian, even though they're just their peer.
Well, I can't deny that happens.
Right, that happens a lot.
I can't. Well, I don't say happens a lot, but it does happen.
So we'll
some
take
cases it's instant gratification and technology.
We'll take this radio show, for instance. A lot of times when I make an opinion that people who are older than me don't agree with, they make the argument that it's because I'm young that I feel that way.
Well, you know,
so
we all have different attitudes and different, you know.
And I know
we can agree to disagree, but sometimes, and then technology.
And honestly, you've been listening to the show for a long time, so I know you've heard that. Now the thing is, I think that it's important to listen to everybody's arguments and even make...
and listen to everyone's ideas and suggestions, because
right.
I'll tell you, there have been younger staff that come up with ideas, and I said, that's very good. Why don't you run that up the line?
Right.
And you take credit for it, not me.
Well, and
on the other hand, you have people that would say, oh, that's not... And then take your idea, steal it from you, and present it as their own.
Now, what year were you born, sir?
I was born in 1949.
All right, so you're technically a baby boomer, but you're a tweener between the traditionalist and the baby boomer generation. So the baby boomer generation was the me generation, and they were the moral authority generation. You were around during Vietnam, you were around during the sexual revolution, you were around during Cold War and space travel.
The Chicago riots.
Yep.
The assassination of Kennedy, both Kennedys, Martin Luther King.
Yep.
I mean, the Black Panthers were involved then. The assassination of Malcolm X.
How about that?
Which is also a turning point.
Right.
Malcolm X was starting to turn the corner a little bit. And the Nation of Islam didn't like that. They didn't like that because there were things going on behind the scenes with Farrakhan, and I forget the leader at the time, who impregnated many, many women in his following. Okay, so there was a lot of turmoil.
So I'm gonna let you make a final point, and then we're gonna go to the next caller because the lines are hot right now, and people want to join in.
I understand that, but I think and technology comes into play.
Yep.
Everybody walks down with their head down, looking at that blue screen. So much so that now they have a supplement for people that are staring at the screen. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
It's called blue. It's a vitamin, because everyone's staring at that blue screen. Right, people have walked into freaking potholes and walked in the telephone poles because they got their head down, and they become victims of muggings.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sorry, go ahead.
Have a great day.
You too.
And one thing, there's actually this video out there of security footage of this woman who's looking down, texting on her phone, and walks right into a water fountain. And you can hear the security guard kind of laughing. But think about this. Somebody's looking down, walking, and walks directly into a water fountain, gets completely wet inside of a mall. Hilarious. But think of how dangerous that could be. You could walk out into traffic. You could walk through a red light. You could do all kinds, or texting and driving, which is even worse. Technology is becoming an addiction. And honestly, I actually was saying this recently off the air. I think that there's going to be a generation who throws out technology because they realize how hazardous it is to human health. What say you? You're live on 1480 WSAR.
What say me, Rich? How you doing? Thanks for taking my call.
I'm
Put
doing
down
great.
The phones and go be with one with nature.
You know, I think that's a fair point. If you go outside and you look at the greenery that's around you, you look at the wonderful things that happen outside. Can you imagine what would happen? But part of it is because of the way that millennials were treated as they were growing up. They were coddled and they were kept inside, but they were also living on a schedule. They were going to soccer practice, then they were going to basketball practice, then they were going to school, and everything was based on a schedule. And a lot of the times, baby boomers and Generation Xers and traditionalists say things like, oh, well, they sat in front of a computer all day long. And that's so far from the truth, it's unreal. They were forced to sit in front of the computer because their parents were afraid to let them play outside.
They're giving kindergartens tablets and stuff now. A lot of people don't realize that, but that's the way we're learning now.
That's Generation Z, but you're right.
You know, that's what we got to compete with. And if you haven't been on a computer, man, you're out the loop.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
You cannot compete in this market if you haven't sat at a computer for hours, and I'm talking logged in a lot of hours at a computer, even if you're shooting around in the dark, Rich. You know what I mean? You have to be competitive in this highly demanding job market, and you have to be careful on what you're going to be working, because every field is different. You got to catch that field that's hot right now. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, it's funny that you say that, because one thing that's happening now more than ever is the average person stays awake 15 to, let's say, 18 hours a day, right? And out of those 15 to 18 hours, they are on their cell phones or their computers. I'd say at least 12 of those hours, right?
Yeah,
when you go to work.
Yeah, I mean, and you know what, Rich? You know, quick thing I want to mention, we have to stop stereotyping people. We're all people, man.
I agree.
We're all people.
Well,
Stop stereotyping millennials. Everybody needs to do this. You know, we got to change our way of thinking. If anything's going to change, we have to change the way we think and approach certain issues.
And it's funny that you say that, because actually that was the point that I was planning on making an hour from now, is these types of stereotypes and lack of understanding, assuming that your generation is right and every other generation is wrong, is part of the problem with society.
It's old versus young, black versus white, man against woman. This is going to stop, guys. This has to stop, ladies and gentlemen. This is what's going to divide us. This is what they want. And these laws don't apply to the people with the money. The people with the money play by their own rules and their own book, Rich.
And it's funny, again, that you say that, because imagine if people in the world, instead of assuming that everybody should be like them, practice the religion that they practice, look like them, act like them, imagine if they were just accepting of everybody who's around them. Accepting that people who are millennials, people who are Generation X, like to challenge authority. They believe that government isn't there to benefit them. Millennials are feeling the same exact way. I actually sat down and I talked to people who, I'd say 3 people who are under 25 years old, above 17 years old, talked to them about government. If I could only tell you the lack of optimism that they feel about the government that represents them, you would be appalled. They don't think that anybody in government represents them.
I'm glad, one quick thing, I'm glad you bring up that point, and that's another thing that needs to change. We're going to have less politicians in this mix. We need less people representing us. A lot of people say, oh, we need more politicians. No, we need less politicians. What about that money that then politicians make, all these five state representatives, or how many representatives, how many congressmen, how many senators, Rich? You know what? Why don't we take that money to educate people so we're not thinking like this, Rich?
So I don't 100% agree with you. What I think we need is politicians that represent us. How about that?
Well, less politician that represents for the common man or woman.
Well, just representatives in general. How about people who understand what people are going through and actually try to solve the real-world issues that people are facing, as opposed to this political debate that only benefits themselves?
We just got to change our way of thinking.
I agree. I agree.
Issues. Thank you, Rich.
Have a great day.
You too, sir.
So let's talk about work ethic, because that continues to keep coming up. So let's start with millennials. Millennials are ambitious. They're always looking for what's next. They're multitasking. They have tenacity, and they're entrepreneurial. Generation X, they prefer balance. Work smarter with greater output, not work longer hours. Eliminate the task, self-reliant, want structure and direction. They're skeptical. Baby boomers are driven. They're workaholics. They work 60 hours a week. They work long hours to establish self-worth and identity and fulfillment. Work ethic equals work ethic quality. And traditionalists, they're dedicated. They pay their dues. They work hard. They respect authority. They focus on hard work. Age equals seniority. So if you're older, and we've heard that here, if you're older, you deserve more seniority. Not based on the amount of work that you've done or based on your position. Older people have greater seniority. And lastly, the company is first. Not the person first, the company first. Which is interesting because when you talk about why millennials and Generation Xers hop around jobs every 3 years to focus on creating more income for themselves, baby boomers and traditionalists tend to frown on that. When really, when you look at the economics behind it, the reason why millennials and Generation Xers are able to make more money is because they're able to hop around and have companies compete with each other for the value of their work. Where a traditionalist, at one point in time, it seems that companies used to care about their employees, and companies still do. Some companies still work very hard to take care of their employees, but traditionalists felt that they were getting the raises that they were doing. They stayed with their company longer and longer and longer, for their entire careers a lot of the time. But when you really look at that, if you use that model today, millennials and Generation Xers would be missing out on huge sums of money because the only way that you get pay raises really is by getting companies to compete with each other. And then you can go to another company and say, hey, by the way, my previous job paid me $50,000 a year. I'm not going to make less than that. So if you want to acquire my services, you're going to have to pay me $53,000 a year. Because a 1% pay increase year over year isn't enough to even curb inflation. So the traditionalist model, the baby boomer model of staying at one place for your entire career may not work in today's society. And the question is it because of the people who work in places, or is it because of the businesses themselves? But I think it's also important to point out the education aspect, which I already have, but I want to point it out again. And that is that people who view education based on generational gaps, education to people who are millennials, it's an incredible expense. And you've heard me say things that are pretty much the same as that. And I think it's not based on opinion, it's based on fact, right? So millennials have seen Generation Xers go in through the process of getting an education. And with that education, it's become harder and harder and harder to find a job, and the cost-benefit analysis isn't necessarily there. So the question becomes, as Generation Z continues to move forward, are they going to not go to college? Are they going to pick up trades? Are they going to say that college is too expensive? Because college is a business, right? Just like anything else, college is a business. And when you look at the business of colleges, they are popping up colleges all over this country because schools continue to tell people it's not only about going to college, but it's about the most expensive college that makes your worth, right? When we talk about people who graduate from high school, we don't talk about the people who go to the community college. We don't say this many people went to community college and glorify the fact that they're saving money and they're still getting an education. No, we talk about the people who are going to Harvard and potentially paying the full ride. You're talking about the people who are going to private colleges, who are maybe on the top 100, 200 list, but they're paying the full ride themselves. Meanwhile, they're picking up all kinds of debt. And what happens if they get an education degree? Right, you get a 4-year degree in education from a school like Harvard, or a school that is a private school like a Bryant or Stonehill, or let's see, Bentley. Bentley's more of a business school, but you go to one of these schools and you get a degree and you pay this huge sum of money. If you live off campus, it's probably around $35,000 a year. If you live on campus, it's about $50,000 a year. So you go out of school with $120,000 to $200,000 in student loan debt. and you go into the workplace and make $40,000 to $50,000 a year. If you live in the Northeast, if you live in the center of the country, you might be making $25,000 to $30,000 a year with that degree from Northeastern or that degree from Boston College, right? So you have this expensive degree and you're never able to catch up because you're not making enough money. If you think about it, you're making $40,000 a year, you have $200,000 in student loans. It will take you 5 years of 100% income, not including taxes, to pay back that student loan debt. But we're about to go back into this conversation about the generation gap. And again, when people talk about the generation gap, the first thing they talk about is the generation gap that they experience in the workplace. And why do you think that is? It's because a lot of the time when people deal with different generations, it is in the workplace. Because at least 40 hours out of your week, at least for the most part, some people more, some people less, they're at work. And when you deal with people who are outside your comfort zone, it's usually at work. Because otherwise you choose to be in the places that you want to be. So if you're trying to help people and stuff like that, you may have more exposure to different types of generations. But work is the place where you experience all this stuff. And one thing is that continues to be said is there's a lack of respect for age, there's a lack of respect for authority, and I think that it's important to talk about how different generations feel about authority. And let's start off with Generation X. So workplace view on respect for authority. Generation X is skeptical. And again, Generation X is the generation that was born between 1965 and 1980. So their view on authority is they're skeptical of authority figures and will test authority repeatedly. Millennials, Generation Y, looks at it like they'll test authority, but often seek out authority figures when looking for guidance. So millennials are this kind of happy medium between baby boomers who originally skeptical of authority, but are becoming similar to traditionalists, and time equals authority, and that's exactly how traditionalists feel. Authority is based on seniority and tenure, but millennials are feeling like we should be skeptical of authority, but we should also seek out those authority figures to learn from those folks as well. So I think it's kind of this happy medium, but a lot of you out there who are listening right now are baby boomers, are traditionalists, are Generation Xers, are millennials, and I'm speaking on my own experience from working in the military, from working in private practice, from working at various minimum wage jobs, working poor jobs, from working to overnight third shift jobs, working with my hands, working with my back, to kind of working in government, working in on the fire department. So I've got to experience some of this in various different perspectives. Now, but my opinions are my own. And I know that you have an opinion. Majority of you out there have worked or continue to work, deal with people in different generations on a regular basis. And I think it's important that we continue to come together. Because the only way that we're going to be able to close these gaps, and what I call the generation gap, and one of the biggest problems with the generation gap is it's causing a government that isn't working. One of the best ways to close these gaps is by understanding other generations, right? Education, knowledge is the way to close majority of the gaps, majority of the animosity that we feel throughout our entire country, if not the entire world, right? If we look at the situation of how people feel about Islam and extremism as a whole, and how they look at extremism, a lot of people in the United States look at extremism and Islam as if they're one and the same. If we take a look at how people feel about standing, sitting, and kneeling during the national anthem, usually it's related to some generational backgrounds. It could be because of some work background or some personal thing that separates people from everybody else. Like veterans feel differently about standing, sitting, and kneeling than somebody who is a traditionalist or a baby boomer. Veterans kind of have the same perspective, I find, across the generations. And I'll tell you my perspective as a veteran, and some veterans feel differently about this. But veterans fought for the ability to speak freely and protest if it doesn't hurt anybody. So somebody who is standing, sitting, or kneeling has the right to do that. Ultimately, that trumps anything. However, I don't necessarily have to agree with it. For instance, I haven't really watched the NFL this season, and I used to love the NFL because of this. I didn't watch the Super Bowl. Why? Because of the standing, sitting, and kneeling. And they have the right to do that, and I applaud them using their First Amendment right to do what they think is protesting. However, I find it offensive that they're doing it during the national anthem. Now, if they would have stood in respect and maybe put a fist up in the air in homage to the Germany games of the Olympics, then that would have been a different story. But to say that you're going to kneel or sit during the national anthem to stand up for the rights of people who are of color, which we should be doing anyway, I think that that is a problem because the flag represents a lot more than you. The flag represents a lot more than the immediate stuff that we're seeing today. It represents the blood of the people have shed in protection of your freedom to stand, sit, or kneel. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Good morning. This is an indigenous sister from the Fall River area.
Okay.
And I'd like to point out that early knowledge and how we interact with each other and how the newborns right up until they start thinking more on their own is all based on what they see those adults around them doing.
I think you're right. And I think that goes as far as when they're going into schooling, being socialized by other people around them.
And so one of the things that my people always remember, and it's just not about human being, it's about all of the variations of life forms, that right down to, let's say, the winged. Birds don't come back unless they know they're going to be safe in a certain place. Everything. And so our actions dictate what our younger children are going to do when they see something that's different from themselves.
And actually, you bring up a great point because you could also assimilate birds who don't come back to a place that they don't think is safe to what's happening with the brain drain, I would say, in the entire United States. Not this show, but the actual process of people leaving areas after they get an education because they can't find work in the location. So there's a lack of safety because they aren't able to find a good paying job to pay down their student loans. And nobody's doing anything in order to fix that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. Well, they are starting to do things where a lot of the institutions are offering free tuition, and especially if you're a commuter to where you don't, because in the state of Massachusetts, state institutions, the tuition is the least of the expense.
Right. Thank you for that, because you're 100% correct. So
yes, living on campus and being involved with all of campus life, that's where the expense is.
Or just the fees associated with classes. You talk about textbooks, which are outrageous. You talk about you're getting fees for not just labs, but you're getting fees to go into individual classes. So the tuition is lower than the actual fees in and of themselves.
That's absolutely correct. And books, you could even take a class where a book is $400.
Can you believe that?
Well,
the cost of an education.
Yes, I can remember when there were certain state institutions that a year would only cost like $150.
Now, here's an interesting perspective for you, and then I'll let you make your final point. But here's an interesting perspective for you. Right now, when you want to go and get your education, you're expected to pony up at least, if you're conservative, $80,000. If you're conservative, you're going to pony up at least $80,000. And the question is, what is college really teaching you? In my opinion, college is just an extension of high school because now they expect you to be present at so many classes, and if you're absent so many classes, then you're going to fail. Now it's not self-guided where you're expected to read the book and go in and learn something that's outside of the book but related. Now they just go through a slideshow that repeats everything that's in exactly the same order in a book, and they're giving quizzes just to show that they're showing up. So we've taken the brain power out of getting a bachelor's degree and we've pushed it off to the master's degree and the PhD. So really, if you were able to succeed even with a C average in high school, you're able to succeed in college with a C average and get a degree. You don't have to have a higher IQ to go to college. You just have to be able to show up.
But what you have to, I agree with what you're saying, but what you have to always remember is a thinking analytical brain doesn't start in college.
I agree.
It starts at birth.
I agree. You know, I think that's probably the best point you could have made today.
It starts at birth. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a great day. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Hi, Mr. Cavaseras. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, and you can call me Rich. I'm doing great.
Rich. I remember going to Osborne Street School, which is now sold, and going to Cuss, and being the one always standing in class to pledge allegiance to the flag. And I had a few younger people at my house during the Super Bowl, and I asked them, I go, do you guys stand in class for the flag when you pledge allegiance, or do you even do pledge allegiance to the flag? They said they do.
Now what?
Three out of the class stands up.
Now, what generation are you?
I was in elementary school in the 80s.
All right. So what? You're Generation X, probably. What year were you born?
74.
All right. Yeah. So you're Generation X, and I'm a millennial technically. I'd call myself an Xennial, but I'm a millennial. And I was standing during the national anthem pretty much my entire time in school, and I was born in '84.
Right.
So, you know,
it's diminishing. I think it's being pushed out the door. I think one day you won't even have the flag at school, and it's sad. I mean, it's the force of planting a seed, and it worked. And I think not just the NFL, he used it, and he used the spotlight instead of using his own time to protest. He used the spotlight of the NFL to do it. And people listened, and they used it like I'm going to show my First Amendment rights, and I'm going to be against it, and that's how it's going on right now, and it's being pushed out the door like everything else is.
And the other thing to consider is these athletes are role models, right? So if you go into an elementary school and you ask them who your role model is, they're not going to say a politician. They're not going to say. They're going to say an athlete or a dancer or a TV actor,
singer,
or a singer. So yeah, these people are role models, and I think they realize that. But I get what they're doing. They're trying to put more of a light on racial inequality, but unfortunately, I think they're doing it in a way that is alienating people as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cavaseras.
Hey, thank you so much, and you can call me Rich every time.
Rich,
thank you for calling in.
Right.
You got it. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Hey, how are you, Cavaseras? Thank you for saving me that honor.
What say you?
I'm Generation Y.
Okay.
Long story short, I swear my mother used to say, "Why are you here?" so many times.
All right, so what do you think about the generation
gap? I used to come back with "It is what it is."
So what do you think about the generation gap? Why does it exist, and how does this relate to your life?
I think, there definitely is a generation gap because Generation Y came here on the tail end of Generation X because, like you said before, Generation X is a means to an end. And Generation Y almost became like an evolution, which is something...
I think every generation, if you look at what they've learned, it's based on their parents. So if you take a look at baby boomers who had millennials, which a lot of them did, or they learned from, millennials learned from baby boomers. So baby boomers had the highest divorce rate and second marriages in history. So when you look at that and you look at what's happening with millennials don't even want to get married, and they grew up with divorced parents, right? So you see, it seems like every single generation is reactive to the generation that was their predecessors.
No, I agree. It's almost like we're all products of our own environment. But you were talking about, like, this is what I think has been lost in these generations. And I was listening earlier, and another caller, they were talking about, like, people not doing what they don't want to do.
Right.
And I think the basis is that people kind of forgot how to earn respect or how to earn things. And I mean,
well, people expect
understand.
respect, but they don't expect to give respect. And you see that in politics, actually huge, right? You have people who hold an office and expect respect, but they don't want to give respect, or they treat people subpar, and they expect to get respect because simply the position that they hold.
Well, and if you look at it, the people that are in that situation are definitely the older generation.
I disagree.
And that's my opinion, because you go out there, right? Any kid goes out there, they do what they don't want to do, and they earn self-respect. Right. And then they go and they do what other people don't want to do, and they earn those people's respect. And then you come, like, for instance, how I've been battling an older generation, a lot of us, when it comes to city government. And we can't even get our opinions get heard. And I won't kiss anyone's rear, but I will show people respect. And, you know what I mean? It just seems like it's the older generation, the Generation X, the baby boomers, that they're still trying to make the means to an end come true. And now that you have another generation that's trying to battle that, that's what causes the generational divide.
Thank you so much for your call. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
And if you look at what happens, if you look at people who are peers, and, you know, I can speak to this from personal experience. When you try to weigh in with somebody who is your peer but is older than you, and you try to give criticism or give advice, you are seen as disrespectful simply because of the fact that you're talking to them as if they're a peer, yet they're older than you. And the opposite happens. People who are baby boomers, in my opinion, a lot of times what happens is they talk down to people who are younger than them simply because of the fact that they're older. And that's all. They could be a peer. When it comes to place in work, when it comes to even experience in work, they could be a peer, but they feel that they have the ability to talk down to somebody who's younger than them. And that's actually from the traditionalist ideal, which is you earn place by the amount of time that you earn status based on the amount of time that you're in a place. You're the last caller before the break, and then we're going to go to the break. What say you, caller?
How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. I think I think the millennials are in a whole different world than past generations.
And why do you feel that way?
Why do I feel that way? You have more educated millennials than any other generation.
I think that's fair.
Okay? You also, the problem with, if you take it by region, a city like Fall River, the millennials are not going to stay here.
Why?
Because you're not going to spend 4 or 5 or 6 years of college and come out. The jobs that they went to college for are not here.
And that's majority of the country. Majority of the country in gateway cities, the term that we use in Massachusetts, but
correct.
Cities that have populations that are undereducated and they have majority of their workforce is working poor. A lot of these places, people who are millennials aren't incentivized to stay because they can't find that middle-class paying job that they went to college for. Exactly. And until you close that gap, you're going to continue to have this brain drain.
If you look at what's happening in mass, the population, I guarantee, maybe not this congressional race coming up, the next congressional race and Senate race, not Senate, but congressional race, we're going to lose a seat because people are leaving in drastic numbers.
But people are just relocating to bigger cities. So
bigger cities and better paying jobs.
Right. So if you go to Boston, or you go to New York City, or you go to, let's say, Los Angeles, California, Seattle, Washington. You go to some of those places, you're going to find those jobs.
Right.
But they're going to big cities as opposed. It's actually the reverse of what happened because of the. What's the word? Suburbs. When suburbia started growing, people moved away from big cities. Now it seems like the opposite is happening, where people are going into big cities again.
Exactly. Because I don't know if you recall, but I believe it was in the 1940s. General Motors wanted to come to Fall River.
Okay.
Okay. And the city council voted it down because the mill owners didn't want them here because of the better wages.
How about that?
Okay, and that's a fact. I mean, I'm not making this up. I just forgot what year that was.
And my guess is they were probably the largest funders to city council campaigns out there. So it's funny. It's funny how finance even then ruled government. I want to thank you for your call. We do have to go to a break, so I'll let you make your last point, and then we got to go to a break. So what's that?
That's my point, but I don't think they show disrespect. I really think they're bottled up. I have a grandson that's taken 14 credits this semester.
Okay.
Okay. He also works for Newport Naval Base.
Wow.
Okay, and he's been doing this as an intern. He's been doing this for 2 years.
Okay.
And he can't even tell me what he does.
It's actually pretty cool.
And he's guaranteed a job once he graduates.
And you don't see that kind of thing often.
No. But I mean, that's an opportunity he fell into. And as far as respect, one of the things, because we've had that conversation.
Right.
His superiors, if he has an idea, because he does a lot of experimental work, if he has an idea, they'll listen to him. They won't put him down. They won't say he's wrong. But they do respect his ideas. And they do respect a lot of other intern ideas.
And if only every workplace was exactly like that. Thank you so much for your call.
You're welcome.
Have a great day. You're live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
How you doing?
Hey, enjoying the song.
Thanks. I can turn it back up for you. Love that song. Hold on, we'll play it in the background while you're talking. Go for it.
Hey, imagine GM coming to Florida.
Well, it's funny because it seems to me, and this is gateway cities or cities that are poverty-stricken, a lot of times the reason why they are the way that they are is because there was a lack of vision from government to expand and assume that everything was going to stay the way that it was where it was previously.
There's that pressure from the mill owners on government.
But again, when you look at what happens is they say, oh, we have all these types of jobs. Nothing is going to change. We don't need to diversify our portfolio of businesses. Everything is going to be just fine. It's only going to get better. Nobody's ever expecting that the economy is going to change, that jobs are going to change, that technology changes businesses. And when it happens, people act as if they're shocked. Well, you know what? We need to start putting people who are actually knowledgeable in office as opposed to people who are just like everybody else.
Instead of playing the game, that's what they do. Knowledgeable, man.
Right, because ultimately, even if they're just like everybody else, a lot of times it's a facade. Your elected officials are really just giving you the facade. They're showing up at your garage door openings just because of the fact that they want to get elected. But really, when you look at it, they're doing it a lot of times to benefit their own wallet.
I listened to that caller yesterday.
Yeah.
I guess his grandson's a millennial.
Yep.
I can't pronounce it correctly.
Millennial.
Millennial.
Yep, and it's funny because
I must have one of those abnormal millennials who's been working since the age of 16.
Well, I guess I'd be one of those too.
At one job. Went to college, graduated high school, went to college for, a few semesters, and still at that one place. And, hey,
And if you look at the statistics today of people who hop around jobs, and this started with Generation X. Generation X would hop around from place to place to place to get pay raises because their companies didn't want to pay them what they were worth. And that's something that I think is going to happen even more so as a millennial. when I was going to school, they would tell you, listen, once you're at a place for 3 years, you don't really want to stay there after 3 years because you start losing your value. If you want to hop to another place between 3 to 5 years, or else you're going to lose what they called your value, because you're not making as much as you could potentially make. And you can demand a higher rate either from your employer, or you can shop the market and get a higher rate than you're currently being paid.
Yeah, the grass is greener on the other side. Look, I used to go down to F.B. Rogers in Taunton for about under $2 an hour.
And the funny part about it is the grass is greener on the other side usually when you get a higher rate when you go to another job. And the reason is because employees have more protections now than they've ever had, right? Things like sexual assault isn't happening in the workplace any longer. Employees have rights like sick leave. They have rights like they're working on paid family leave right now.
Look up an article when they reformed welfare back in Bill Clinton's days. What happened to Lawrence, Massachusetts? Lawrence, what is that town?
Lawrence is in Massachusetts.
Okay. Half of the population was on welfare.
And I think
they think reforming welfare to a certain point may help, but actually made things worse.
Well, here's the funny part about this. Somebody called in yesterday and said if we increase the minimum wage that people will get off welfare, and if anything, the minimum wage has been increasing and more people are going on things like SSI, SSDI, or welfare.
SSI is disability.
Well, I get that, but more people are on those services now than were when every single time the minimum wage increased. And
go ahead. I'm sorry. I've only got a minute. So, when I heard the caller with the Jaguar yesterday, I don't have a Jaguar, but I did drop off my sister over there. And I take a little offense to it. But, she's 72 years old who looks like a 50-year-old. So I told her, all you need is a sugar daddy. She says, I'm all done with sugar daddies.
And the sad part is, it's funny because we're talking about female empowerment and stuff like that, but women are still told today that, why would you marry somebody for love when you can marry for money and then love comes, right? So when you really think about it, we talk about equal rights. We talk about equal rights, and this is something that even the millennial generation is kind of picking back up, where they're marrying or they're dating more so for
not abnormal. I got an abnormal kid. My friends are having babies and all this stuff, and she sees it. So
and the beauty of talking to somebody like you is, I think that you have this perspective.
Beauty in me,
no,
man.
no. Let me kind of give you a compliment.
No hair, no teeth.
You always are willing to kind of look at something at a broad sense. And tell me what you think about it in a broad sense, and you're willing to take feedback. You don't see that often, so I appreciate you calling in on a regular basis.
I hope I respected you yesterday. Yesterday after I got off the show, I seen some, stuff on the ground. I hate that. Pick it up, go throw it near the dumpster, and there's your political sign near it. What the heck is this? Someone must have blew off it somewhere.
And it's funny because when you
gave it a shot, right?
Listen, we don't have to talk about me running for political office because it's not happening again. But
you took a popular vote, right?
Listen,
one time.
Listen, so yeah, and again, I was happy to serve, but
you got ideas.
Oh, I think one of the reasons why I work here is because I have ideas.
Absolutely.
But I appreciate you again, and I hope to hear from you soon. I know I'm probably going to hear from you tomorrow. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks. Somebody on Facebook Live on the J&J Jewelers Facebook Live cam says that why again can't the middle class jobs come here? Can't the old mills be made into businesses, centers, or office buildings? And he says he actually asked for a request for a song. I missed it until right now. But I think that's a fair point. Why can't people get jobs here? Or in general, around the country? Why are they happening in the city centers? And I think it's a lack of vision with actual people who are in political office. You are live on the legendary 1480 WSAR. What say you?
Yeah, I tend to agree with the fact that when the elected officials are not procurers of industry, there will be no industry. And I think that's very true, because if they don't show an interest in reaching out and letting people know what's available to them, there would be probably to their advantage to open a company in the city. It's not going to happen.
Well, let's talk about economic development as a whole. Why are cities pitted against each other to give more incentives to businesses? Wouldn't it be more beneficial to just maybe lower the business tax rate and allow businesses to go everywhere based on the regular things that a city has going for it or a town has going for it, as opposed to giving people tax breaks?
I think that that's a very important point, and I think that it's probably the answer to the question. It's difficult to get it started because of the way that it is right now. But the thing is that the people that are attaining their degrees, let's not forget that just because the city's in a situation doesn't mean that the constituents are. They're getting educated, they're getting their skills, their toolbox is filled with skills, and they're going to where the jobs are.
Well, I actually wrote a paper about this.
That's what you said. The government is not long-visioned on this.
I actually wrote a paper about this, and so the boring term that I gave for it was educational attainment trade deficit, meaning that kids who actually went and got an education, when they came back to their, say, city that is a working class city that was blue collar and didn't really have any middle class paying jobs, they left. And what replaced them were people who were going to those cities looking for the social advantages or the welfare services or service oriented people.
Services.
And if this
I was with you on that. I followed that all the way, and I agree with you. And let's be honest, the services do not pay what the other jobs would pay, which would be, I would say, middle-class jobs. Not to use, I'm fumbling for the right word, but the jobs where you can get a mortgage and not pay a landlord.
And if this phenomenon continues to happen, regardless of you could give people the best education in the world. They could have an education that's Harvard level, that's Yale level, all through elementary school, and then they could have the college in the actual municipality. And if they go and they get that grade A education and they can't find a job here, they're just going to leave.
They do. And I met a man in Maryland, for instance, who you brought up a great point right there, who was a Harvard graduate, and he was in Maryland driving a tow truck. He had been overseas. He had worked with different villages in Africa and stuff like that. He also had a lucrative job.
Can you put the speaker closer to your mouth because I can't hear you?
Yes. And the point is, he was a Harvard graduate driving a tow truck. He said, I'm going to do this for 6 more months and try to get back into the race. But there's nothing out there for me. He said, I've got an education that if I don't get back into the race, it will be obsolete.
Well, if you look about opportunity, right? Opportunity is there if you go out and grab it, but you have to be willing to leave where you are. And millennials aren't afraid to go somewhere else in the country because they're attempting to be more worldly. So this is something that is a phenomenon that we haven't seen yet, and just funding education alone isn't going to solve the problem. There needs to be more of an effort to get businesses into some of these communities. Otherwise, the major cities are going to continue to grow in population because millennials don't need big houses. I don't know what happened with the phone, but millennials don't need big houses.
Well, millennials know one thing. They're probably in debt with a loan, educational loan, and they're going to immediately go to where the jobs are. They're not going to be concerned about the future and the heritage of the city they came from or anything of that nature. They have got to put food on a table, a roof over their head, and be in the profession that they've paid out dearly for.
Well, I have a bold prediction. I have a bold prediction that some millennials are going to figure out a way to train people and get people knowledgeable in a way that doesn't involve the college system for the Generation Z people who are going to college, because they see the gap in the amount of student loans that you need just to be able to get a job. So,
just to get in the game.
So I think some entrepreneurial millennials are going to figure out a way to skirt the college system while still giving people the skills necessary to go out and get a job outside of trades. I'm thinking that's going to happen.
The cities are filling up with disenfranchised individuals.
Right. I'm telling you right now, if college continues to go the way that it is, 30 years from now, people will not go to college anymore because there's no return on investment. People will just pick up textbooks.
It's a trades-oriented society. And hopefully it'll be entrepreneurship that brings people. Small business is suffering, let's face it. And the thing is a lot of entrepreneurial people are suffering because small business is suffering. You just can't get that ground floor startup.
So it's funny about bold predictions, and it's funny because I just realized that I made a bold prediction. When I make bold predictions, I'm usually pretty right, and I made some bold predictions at the beginning of this year. But I'm, again, making the bold prediction that if colleges continue to increase expenses and have little yields when people try to go find a job, two things are going to happen. More people are going to have master's degrees and PhDs by 30 years from now than ever before. And the second thing is less people are going to go to college because they realize that the return on investment isn't there. Unless everything drastically changes.
And when you know that, would you go to the dog track or the horse track or any Las Vegas casino and make a bad bet time after time after time? And if you do win, you get a very chump change return. And it's not going to happen. These people are invested, and this is what we've got to remember. Once they get that sheepskin, they are invested. They're ready to go. They're ready to hit the ground running. You've got to provide them something, a target. You've got to provide them a goal. So you've got to show that you're interested in that. This is where the Chamber of Commerce has to have.
You know, I think you're right. We need the business entities and the Chamber of Commerce to get more involved in trying to get businesses to locate here. Thank you so much for your call. We're getting towards the end of the show. I appreciate it. Have a great day. And